Well, thank you all so much for coming to this panel this morning. We're really excited to kind of talk about some of the things on the horizon for climate change in Delaware and what we should be expecting. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So for our panel, thank you all for being here this morning. And yeah, so I guess just start with a simple question. When we think about climate change in the state, what should we be thinking about? What sort of factors exist? And, you know, is it sea level rise? Is it warming temperatures? And, you know, what should we be thinking about?
I guess that's me. Is this on? Or
Yeah, it's on. You guys just might want to bring it a little closer.
All right. I'll just hold it. I mean, all the above.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the answer. Sea level rise certainly is probably our major concern because of the fact that we're the lowest lying state in the United States. And that has significant implications for our future flooding potential. Temperatures are also concerning, particularly for human health aspects. You know, we expect to see more extreme temperatures in the future, and that could have significant implications on particularly vulnerable populations. And then precipitation, looking at potential extremes in precipitation, increasing extremes, and that effects on people's lives, safety, infrastructure. So my answer is all the above.
Well, coming from a coastal town right here, mid-coast area of Delaware, we're kind of ground zero, and we see it all. I would say we're exposed from the ocean, which is rising. Where the ocean rising is affecting the back bays, which is causing flooding in our town. And this is not just a slight thing. It happens 30 to 40 days a year when we've got 25% of our town flooded. So and climate change, yes, we've seen it come. We're seeing it more and more and more. So look into the future. How do we address it? We've had several things that we're working on. And things that are in place that are important to us. The refurbishing or replenishment of our beaches and our dunes. More importantly, the dunes, because that's what protects the towns. And it's not just Bethany; it's all the coastal towns. They're all, we all get replenishment. We're all subject to ocean rise. When storms come in, they're greater than ever. Although this winter it's been kind of interesting because, believe it or not, we've had no northeasters this winter. Very, very unusual. And because of that, our dune's in pretty good shape this year. But there have been years, you go back 2016, the dune was hit by a large storm during the wintertime, extended nor'easters. The dune was totally degraded to the point where it was actually breached on the south end of our boardwalk. So you can see the exposure. I'll cover some other things as we go along, so I'll pass it along to Susan. I don't want to be...
Yeah, we certainly have a lot to talk about in this space, and I'd like to emphasize some of what Kevin shared earlier, right? Climate change is no longer something in the distant future that maybe our grandchildren need to think about or that we don't have to think about today. Climate change is here. It is affecting our daily lives. It is creating changes in our state. And we know this because, partly because of the DEOS network and the monitoring that's done both state and nationally. We know that our average temperature has increased in the state by 3 degrees over the past about 100 years. I'm going to do some facts. I'm going to look at Kevin every time I do a fact and make sure that it's right. Our growing season has expanded by over a month over the past 100 years. We are seeing more days of nuisance flooding. Our sea levels, as measured at the Lewis tide gauge, which has been in existence since about the 1900s. I want to say turn of the century, but turn of the century to kids now means 2000, not 1900. And so since this second turn of the century, we've seen 16 inches of sea level rise measured at that gauge. And that is very consequential in a low-lying area. We view climate change as a threat multiplier. Have there always been nor'easters? Absolutely. Have there always been hurricanes? Yes, not hitting Delaware, luckily for us. Has there always been tidal flooding? Yes. Have there always been hot days and heat waves? Absolutely. But climate change is throwing gasoline on that fire and exacerbating those natural systems and creating a system that's a little bit more wild, a little bit more extreme, and we know that's going to continue over time. So think about climate. You might hear that a lot from panelists today, climate change as a threat multiplier. And due to the partnerships that we have in the state and the vast amount of knowledge that we have at the University of Delaware in the Climatologist office, and there's a whole bunch of other offices, and I'm not going to, CEMA, the Center for Environmental Monitoring and Analysis, yes, is one of the very important ones. So we have a great partnership. We also can model what the future looks like. And we're repeating that now, and we've done that in the past, and we know we're going to have more sea level rise. The amount of climate change exacerbation depends on the choices we make today about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And so when we think about what to do about climate change, I know we're going to focus a lot today on the sand, on the shifting sands, on the things that we can do to prepare ourselves for the changing climate, the heat, the more flooding, the sea level rise. But I also want everybody to keep in mind that to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we need to be reducing our greenhouse gas emissions rapidly and meet our state climate goals, which is net zero emissions by 2050, which I can probably talk about later. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. No, sweet. That was a great appetizer. It sets up a lot of topics we're going to talk about here today. One that all three of you brought up was the idea of extreme weather and these extreme weather events. In recent years, we've seen some more, extreme weather events like some tornadoes. We're seeing more droughts in the region. It smells like there's a wildfire outside. How much can we expect these to be one-offs, and how much is climate change kind of affecting these?
So looking at it just from the science of climate change and the warming climate, as Susan says, climate change sort of amplifies the problem. If we have a warmer climate, we would expect to see more availability of water in the atmosphere, and we would see higher, more extreme precipitation events. Looking at our historical data, we don't see as much of that in Delaware as in other parts of the region, but we have seen a slight uptick in some of the 1 inch and greater precipitation events historically. Looking farther out in our climate projections data, we are seeing potential for more extreme precipitation. This is primarily due to the fact that the atmosphere can hold more water when you have a warmer climate. These storms will have more available energy, and that energy translates to greater precipitation in the future. So that's one area there. Delaware naturally has a highly variable precipitation climate, right? We can have 1 year where we see a lot of rain and some years where we don't see as much. What we see in projections for Delaware is more of the extremes, right? More years with high precipitation totals, more years with lower precipitation totals. That variability increasing makes it more challenging to respond to future climate situations. So that's another concern we have on that. I don't know if that answered all of your question, but I can answer more if you need.
I think we'll get to that a little later. So.
And as we know, the state of Delaware is fairly flat. You look at the coastal areas, however, and we are extremely flat. Bethany Beach is 85% within the floodplain. So, that kind of paints the picture of how extreme weather events can affect the coastal areas very drastically. That's one of the things we have to, we as a town, we're looking at it all the time. We're looking at ways to prevent things. I won't go into prevention yet because I know that's coming. But the exposure to it is extreme. And, as I said before, it's the ocean, but But our main flooding that comes every day is from storm surge, from king tides that are pushing the water levels higher, and they come in through the back bays, they come directly into towns. If you look at Dewey Beach, for instance, right here, it's probably one of the most extremely exposed towns in the state. But, you know, South Bethany, all of the towns, Fenwick, we're all exposed to even slight changes. So, yes, this is kind of ground zero. So.
Yeah, so as Kevin was talking about too, that the range of extremes that we may need to be prepared for in the future is much wider than what we're prepared for today. And think about 16 inches of sea level rise since 1900, right? Think about a bathtub and pour 16 inches of water into that bathtub. And now, let's say we have a strong nor'easter or the remnants of a hurricane coming up, you want to pour 6 inches more of rain on top of that. So as we're seeing more rainfall, the rain and the tides that are happening on top of a much higher base elevation of that water, right? And so that's a multiplying threat impact. The oceans are also warming at a very rapid rate. And so that's not necessarily happening in Delaware, but we live on a great blue planet, and what happens on our great blue planet affects us here in the state. So with the warmer oceans, there's also been, you know, there's not more hurricanes, but some of the hurricanes that we're having have more fuel, and they spin up very quickly, and they're very large. And we are likely to see much more heavy rainfall from the remnants of hurricanes coming through in the future. And so that's something that we need to be prepared for and are looking at.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Susan's just saying about looking at storms. With sea level rise, let's just say hypothetically, we didn't see any differences in the storm intensities or even the storm frequencies. And we're not saying that's the case, but let's just say hypothetically that was the way the future climate was going to be. If we have another foot or two of sea level rise, right, and we have a nor'easter come through or the remnants of a hurricane, the impacts are going to be much more severe than anything we've seen before, because a foot or two higher water level to start with, you know, you throw 3-4 feet of surge on top of that, you're seeing places that have never been flooded to that level before. That future potentially is as close as 30 years from now. We could see another foot of rise in sea level by the middle of the century, okay? That's a major thing. If you think about what we've seen in the last 100 years, that level of sea level rise, we could see that in the next 30 years, okay? Because the sea level rise is actually accelerating a little bit right now, okay? And what we don't know exactly is what the potential sort of global factors in sea level rise. We don't know how much melt we're going to see from some of the Antarctic ice shelves or Greenland. We expect to see more, but we don't know how drastic that's going to be. So we look at scenarios to try and understand, okay, if this happens, this is what we could potentially see in sea level rise. If this doesn't happen, you know, these are all kind of choices in some ways to try and figure out how much sea level rise we might see in the future.
And with that accelerated sea level rise, there's this idea of salt water kind of pushing into some of our natural estuaries. How do we expect that to kind of impact some of our natural landscape in the area?
Kevin says, save me. Well, so when we think about saltwater intrusion, you want to think about two things, right? Water moving across the surface. And so in our tidal bodies of water, as we have sea level rise, you expect to see the saltwater line in all of our tidal estuaries move north, right? And that has an impact on fishing habitat. It has an impact on vegetation. You see when you're driving around the state ghost forests that are happening, and that's largely a result of saltwater intrusion. Trees that are not used to dealing with salt, you know, they can't take it and they die off. We also have saltwater intrusion happening where you can't see it in the groundwater table as well. So, and this is an emerging line of research. The University of Delaware is doing long-term monitoring and research in partnership as well with the Delaware National Estuarine Research Reserve in the St. John's watershed in Delaware. There are some preliminary findings, but we're seeing that saltwater underground is has a perhaps much larger, wider impact than the saltwater that we're actually seeing on the surface. So we're concerned about both of those. And underground, particularly in the coastal area, where farmers rely on irrigation wells, those irrigation wells are going to be some of the first to really experience saltwater intrusion. They may not be able to utilize that source of water anymore because you don't want to spray saltwater on crops. It's pretty bad for them. They don't like that. That also can impact drinking water. And we may also have water table rising that could impact septic system function as well. So it's easy to see, and it's easier to sort of map and show visualizations about what's going to happen on the surface, but know that there are things happening underground that we're also tracking and monitoring, and that are going to be impactful for folks along the coast.
Yeah, and as part of it, as far as the town goes, you know, we have our water plant that serves us our drinking water. In a coastal town, we have numerous observation wells that are put in just to monitor are we getting infiltration? Is it getting into our systems? In Bethany, we have them right along, right at the beach parking lots, but we also have them right next to our wells. Bethany Beach is fed by primarily 4 deep wells. This is, and when I say deep, they go 200 plus feet down into very deep aquifers. There's a good reason for that. It's because we don't want the interference from the surface. Could be from chemicals, could be from salt water. But, you know, you have to think about that and you have to monitor it. All our wells are additionally protected by raising up the well caps above the surface, so that if we do get flooding, they are protected to a certain degree, and we would hope well beyond floods that we're going to experience in the near time. So,
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, is just that you know, this saltwater intrusion issue is not just, we think of it as it's a slow process, and in some ways it is, right? Sea level rise is sort of an evolving, slow-moving process overall. But saltwater intrusion can happen in small events and episodes. If we have a significant coastal flood situation, you can see the saltwater overwash areas. When the water from the tidal marshes or the saltier water gets into these farmlands, farmland in particular, the longer it sits there, the more salt water or saltier soil that's left behind. And it takes a long time for that land to become usable again for agriculture. And so, you know, it can happen fairly quickly in the right situation. It can also happen more slowly over time, as we see sort of with the aquifers and saltwater intrusion into some of our aquifers.
And when we kind of mentioned this earlier in the way of superstorms hitting the state, as it stands right now, Delaware has kind of been able to avoid many of those major storms. But is this something kind of in the coming years we should be thinking and be preparing for at a state level, that a superstorm like Sandy could hit Delaware?
We don't have a wall that keeps storms away from us, right? So, I mean, we're fortunate. We have, some of the Atlantic coastline kind of helps us a little bit. Unfortunately for the Outer Banks of North Carolina, they kind of shield us a little bit from some storms. But we're not immune to it. I mean, we saw with Sandy coming into New Jersey, very close by. And, Sandy, New Jersey hadn't seen a storm like that in a very long time, too. It wasn't very far from us. And if Sandy had come into Delaware, like it did into New Jersey, we would be in a bad situation just like they were then. So we're not immune to it. We have to watch out for that. We would expect to see some changes in the intensity of coastal storms and hurricanes in the future with the warming climate. We're not sure yet about the frequency aspect of it, but that is something that we are looking into, trying to understand, by simulating storms, basically, using future climate conditions. So that's something that we hope to do in the future.
Yeah, I mean, towns, we do a lot of protecting, prevention, looking ahead, trying to predict what might be coming. As Kevin said, it's very hard to predict, and we've been very lucky. When Sandy came through, it was very interesting. If it had come 100 miles south, we would have had some major deal of impact. The way it came in, though, was kind of interesting because it came in to the north of us, and we got the winds coming out of the west. So it caused flooding from the back bays, not from the ocean, but from the back bays. So towns like Dewey here had an extreme impact from that storm, with flooding coming in from the west, and then South Bethany, Fenwick as well. Bethany was a little bit in good shape because we don't, our exposure is yes from the back bays because we have, ours comes in through the Assawoman Canal, but not directly from the bay. So, but extreme storms, yes. Rainfall has to be considered. A heavy rain event can be catastrophic. I think it was December of 23 that we had a very heavy rainstorm that came through. 3-4 inches of rain. It may have even been a little bit more in a very short period of time. And being a flat community, our systems are not designed and can't handle that sort of runoff. So where does it go? It goes into the streets, goes into our properties, it builds up. We were totally flooded. Garfield Parkway right downtown, foot of water. It was totally flooded. Yes, it will absorb and run off over time, but you still get that impact when the storm hits. Usually, a storm like that, the runoff will take, a day, 2 days, 3 days to get back to normal. But it does, it certainly creates an impact.
So I think that the question was, should we be preparing for larger impacts? And I do want everybody to know that the state of Delaware and the local communities, we routinely and annually prepare for large emergency events and large storm events. The Delaware Emergency Management Agency has a hazards mitigation plan that they update every 5 years to look at the emerging hazards and to prepare for what might come in these large episodic storms. And they do take into account climate change in that plan. And they started doing that in the 2011, 2012 sort of time period. So we work with them closely so that they're thinking about future conditions. Preparing for, and the State Housing Authority is also undergoing a planning process for emergency housing. So they are now looking for opportunities. If we have a big event that displaces tens or hundreds of people, where can we house those displaced people? And the need for this arose in part because of a disastrous storm that happened in Wilmington 2 years ago, and I forget, what was the? Ida. The remnants of Hurricane Ida came through, and on a sunny day, the Brandywine River through Wilmington flooded to I think a historic level, and it flooded a community out quite badly, and we were not particularly prepared for that event. Ida didn't hit us directly. It was remnant storms, and it was a lot of rain that happened in Pennsylvania, right, that flowed down to us. So we need to be prepared for both of those things. Since I have the mic, I'm going to say that preparing for those large episodic disaster events is one type of planning that needs to happen. And it's a very important type of planning. But the planning you do for those kinds of events where the goal is to get back into your homes, right? We're going to have a big flood event, and we're going to repair our homes, and we're going to go back into those homes. That is different than preparing for the daily incremental impacts of climate change that we know are happening. The slow and accelerating sea level rise, the increasing heat, the higher precipitation levels. And so we need to be doing both of these in conjunction with one another as we move forward, and be mindful of the fact that there are two things happening simultaneously: big events and incremental impacts.
And what can we do to kind of either slow or tamp down some of these effects that we're seeing, whether it be rising temperature or sea level? You kind of mentioned this earlier with the idea of the slowing of emissions in the state, but is there anything else that could be done?
Can I
Yeah.
just one thing here is in terms of, coastal towns, when you have a disastrous storm coming through, the town has to be evacuated. I mean, it's a normal thing. Sandy was the last time Bethany Beach was evacuated, but it happens. It happens, and you have to have a structured, well-planned evacuation plan, which we believe we do. And then, going beyond that, how does your town function when it's underwater? Well, Bethany Beach, we have what we call our emergency operations center, which is not in town. It's 5 miles inland. It's on one of our storage properties that we use for storage of large equipment and supplies for the town. But we actually have a facility that will double as town hall. The police department has their total area. They can move in a second and be up and running as they would normally be. The town administration, the public works, our communications with the outside world, all is set up so that desks are there, computers are in place, and if the event occurs, they just pick up their belongings and move directly in it, and the desk is there, operational, ready to go. The next step is, once a storm has resided and moved away, what do you do? How do you deal with it? Where does the money come from to repair the damages and whatever? We maintain, and I would hope that others do. I know that other towns are doing the same thing, and I believe the state, I'm not sure to what extent the state does it, but they should, create an emergency fund. We have what we call our SURF fund, which is the, let's say, what does it stand for? Emergency Recovery Fund. Which we contribute to yearly and build it up and build it up and build it up, because the time will come. The time will definitely come. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So, thank you.
I want to come back to this question of, what people can do to prevent it, but I did have a question for you specifically about what your constituents are talking to you about when it comes to climate change or the idea of flooding. What are people telling you between your constituents or other local leaders?
What to do with the town?
Just in the way of, concerns, feedback. What are you hearing from people in your communities about?
Well, it's a funny thing in a resort town. You have 1,200 permanent residents. You have 30,000 in the summer. Most people don't live there, but we have a vibrant, growing, active town. It's fed by all this development that's going on in the back areas. The Millvilles, the Dagsboroughs, the Ocean Views. We all know how much housing is being built out there, and they're not there because of what's out there. Yes, they're there because Delaware has low taxes, but they're there because the Delaware coastal area is a wonderful place to live under normal conditions.
You that wasn't supposed to be a laugh line, I don't think.
Well, we were talking about storms. It's not a wonderful place during a disaster event. So, but most of the time it's a wonderful place to live, and that's why so many people come here. So yes, I think a lot of people are coming to this, to recognize that events need to be addressed and what needs to be done, because they come in November, they come in the off season, and all of a sudden their streets flooded. So, we have a lot of things that we're working on. Do we want to get into prevention here now? Or?
If you want to talk about what you're doing to prevent in your community, I was going to move on to another question, but if you want to.
Okay. I mean, prevention is a key thing in a town. In Bethany, we believe we have a near-term solution to our nuisance flooding. We've been working for almost 15 years on what we call our mechanical flap dam, which would go in our loop canal. The waters that flood Bethany Beach come into the Assawoman Canal from the back bays and then directly into the town through our loop canal. So if we're able to, and we're in the permit stage right now, so we're discussing it with the local authorities and trying to get our approvals in place. But if we're able to put that, I won't say if, I'm going to say when we're able to do that, it will prevent, our engineers say, and I believe them, 95% of the nuisance flooding, the flooding that occurs 30 to 40 days a year. That's a big step. That's a big step, a big help. It's not the ultimate. It's not what's going to help us in 30 to 40 years. In 30 to 40 years, bigger things are going to have to happen. I would hope, and I'm just putting that out, I would hope that efforts like the Back Bay study and DELDOT's study of Route 1, what they can do with that, will address some of this, the bigger picture, and maybe bigger events, bigger projects that can help the coast in 30, 40 years from now.
Gotcha. You did bring something up that I feel like, it's impossible not to talk about in Sussex County, which is development and housing. When we think about that, how is a booming real estate market in Delaware affecting climate change in the area, by adding more impervious surfaces or increasing demand for resources? And what can local, county, and state leaders do to promote more sustainable growth, more sustainable development across the state?
Can I take this?
Yeah.
Let me take the first shot. Listen, so I won't touch on this for very long, but in addition to adaptation, which Mayor Calef is talking about, adapting to the changes, building flood walls, building flap dams, that is very important in addressing climate change. The other really important thing to do to address climate change is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. Climate change is caused by humans. It is us. It is primarily the burning of fossil fuels, which goes into our atmosphere and creates a blanket around our Earth, warming it beyond what we might want it to be warmed. And that's causing all of the changes that are happening here on the surface of our planet. The warming stops when we stop emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And those are primarily, right now, really the ones that we're most concerned about here in Delaware is carbon dioxide and methane. If we do not do a good job right now reducing emissions, the future of our state is going to be very different than it would be if we do a very good job of reducing emissions. 2 years ago, our state legislature set a target for net zero emissions by 2050. This is achievable and ambitious. I think I'm supposed to say it the other way. It's ambitious and achievable. But it's going to take a lot of work. We have reduced emissions in the state. In 2020, that was a weird year, if you remember. Our benchmark year is 2005. In 2020, we had reduced our emissions by 30%. So that is very good. Those emission reductions primarily were driven by cleaning up the electric sector, so electric transmission. primarily by transitioning from coal to natural gas and then deploying some solar. That's really where we've gotten the most emissions reductions. In order to meet the goal, we need to do a lot of stuff in this state, much of it outlined in the Climate Action Plan, of which I have several if you are interested. We have to reduce emissions from our transportation sector. I'm getting to the point here. Our transportation sector is the largest single sector for greenhouse gas emissions right now. And that is not trucks, primarily. That is you and I driving around this state that has developed in a very sprawling manner, which necessitates a car to survive, right? To get to work, to get to doctor's offices. If you try to walk in Sussex County from your home to your doctor's office, you are going to go splat because somebody's going to run you over and you're not going to make it, even if you dared to try. And so, right, so we need to reduce the transportation emissions. We do that in part by transitioning to electric vehicles. We just announced that our electric vehicle rebate program in the state has been extended for another year, so please talk to me about that if you're interested in doing your part there. But we also need to drive less. And in order to reduce our vehicle miles traveled, we need to develop our landscape in a way that is more walkable and bikeable. And that means changing our perspective of density, right? And when we talk about density, density tends to be a 4-letter word with people, oh, dense housing, oh, that's bad. No, density is good. When we build a lot of homes in a dense area, we have the opportunity to get out of our cars and walk. We have the ability to just jog down to the coffee shop, we also have the ability to have transit that works. The transit system in Delaware doesn't work very well because it's really hard to get buses where you need to go, and the buses have to go 20 miles to pick somebody up and then take them another 20. It just doesn't work on this scale. So building in a dense manner is really important, but it's also important when we do that to make sure that we are building in areas that are not at risk to future flooding impacts that we know are coming. I've got lots more on that, but I'll clam up for a minute to let other people talk. But remember that we have to get those, when the emissions stop, the warming stops. And we can play a very significant role here in Delaware, not only doing it for ourselves, but leading the nation and leading the world in making that goal happen.
I can firsthand say that Delaware has a program for solar cells where they will kick back $6,000 right off the top if you put solar cells on your house. We did it this last year, and it's working great. I love to go out and watch the meter go backwards. Oh, yeah. It's just exciting. It's one of those exciting things. But
now plug your car into that.
I know.
And then you're driving on the sun, and then you can really feel good about yourself.
But other things that can be done by homeowners and should be done, and DNREC has a wonderful IDAP tool that if you haven't tuned into it, please do. But it shows you what you can do on your property to your house to help in the case of storms and runoff, to take care of heavy rain events and whatever. There are so many things that you can do, and in the town of Bethany, we do have ordinances that require a certain amount of pervious land on all new developments. That's another thing to keep in mind and to really look at on your property if you are in those areas. Bethany has a Help the Town of Bethany Beach Fight Flooding pamphlet that has a lot of suggestions in it too. I have several. I have many of them, so if somebody would like some, I'd be more than happy to pass them out.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to open it up to you all if you have anything else you want to share before we open it up to questions from the audience. But we covered a lot here today, so,
Let me do one more thing that I think your audience will appreciate. And that is the role of our natural and working lands in this battle. I know that in Sussex County, a lot of people are very concerned about the loss of farmland and forests. And, of course, I am as well. Those farmlands and forests provide both adaptation and emission reductions value for us. The farmlands and the forests suck carbon out of the air and store it. Right? And that is really important. When I talked about our net zero goal, what that net zero goal means is that we know in 2050, even if we do a really great job, there's still going to be some emissions. And so we're going to need to compensate for those emissions in some way, shape, or form. Right now, our natural and working lands in the state of Delaware compensate for about 7% of our emissions. But development patterns have reduced, at least in Sussex County, the landscape that's covered in forests and fields. So that jives with the density. When we have density, we can do a better job of preserving farmlands and fields. Those also help with adaptation, right? If we've got large buffers around our streams, that helps with flooding issues and keeps homes and infrastructure out of the way. So our forests, our ag fields, our wetlands are also critically important in both adaptation and reducing emissions. Thanks for that opportunity to get that in.
Yep, thank you all. Anybody else?
I'll just mention one thing. Climate change is a global problem. I think everybody recognizes that. The impacts of climate change are local. They're felt at the local level. And our ability to handle what's to come is somewhat shaped by what we're willing to do now, certainly from the mitigation aspects that Susan's mentioned, but even from the adaptation side of understanding what that impact looks like locally, right? We can sit here and talk about a foot or 2 or 3 foot of sea level rise. What does that mean for that road that you drive on? What does that mean for the hospital that's nearby, that's maybe too close to the floodplain, right? We need to be able to look at that. And then I think on top of that, and this is the conundrum that I constantly debate in my head and talk about with people all the time, is how much is too much? When does the flooding become so bad that we need to do something different? Whether it's raise a road or find a different way to get people from A to B, where we need to move a facility that's critical, right? Those are the questions that we have to answer, and we've got to figure them out, because these types of decisions, the plans that we put in place now for these infrastructure decisions, this infrastructure is meant to be around for the next 20, 30, 50, 60, 70 years, depending on what it is. The climate's going to be very different then. So we need to figure out what those points are and put plans into place to make those changes now. We're making decisions now that are going to affect us when climate change is worse. So we need to make those decisions first. That's mine.
Awesome. Sweet. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions now. I don't know if I do the picking. I don't want that power.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Lori Spagnolo, and I'm speaking solely as a constituent and resident of Delaware. I think one of the elements that we're really missing in this conversation is our convenience lifestyle. Nobody's talking about DoorDash. Nobody's talking about Amazon. There are an awful lot of Amazon drivers out there. I don't see them buying electric cars. I don't see them putting solar on their houses. And it seems that Delaware really likes to welcome Amazon warehouses into the state. So how do we address that as part of reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Thanks, Lori. I'll take a stab. Everybody's looking at me. I'll take a stab at that. I have lots of battles with my husband about how many times a day the Amazon driver is at the door, because it's frequently more than once. And we will continue to have that conversation. I'm not sure I will win, though. The emissions from the heavy-duty fleet is actually a much smaller part of the emissions than the driving that we do. So while yes, you see them a lot, it's actually not as much of the emissions as you might think. We are undergoing right now, we are developing our 2025 climate action plan, which is due out in November. we are working on we're modeling the future and looking at emissions today. So we're going to have a better picture of what those emissions actually look like. Amazon is converting to electric trucks, electric delivery trucks, and if you've been in Chester County or Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, you may have seen them driving around. They're super cute. They're Rivians, and Evolve, which is a EV-only repair shop, has a long-term contract with Amazon to repair those vehicles. So those vehicles are being repaired in Delaware, but they've not been deployed yet. So we know that there are a lot of warehousing facilities that are being developed throughout the state, and we're going to be looking at the emissions from that and possibilities for developing programming or policy perspectives for making the environmental footprint of those facilities a little bit better.
Not to be an Amazon apologist as well, but they do own several of the largest solar fields here in Delaware, including on top of the Middletown distribution facility is a very large array. They also built the state's largest array just south of Middletown.
And they have a sustainability plan. So a lot of these large corporations have sustainability plans, and they are working on their operations to make those operations more sustainable. So Amazon is one. IKEA is another one that's been a real leader in that space.
Hi, Rick Moore. I'm here both as a resident and a board member of the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility. And I want to ask a short question, but also make a plug at the same time. The short question is, what should be the long-term strategy? And I say strategy because a plan is what you control, strategy is what you don't have control over, but what are you going to do when it happens? The plug is, we had a meeting up in Wilmington yesterday that I want to mention because we're having a meeting on Friday, the UU Church in Lewis, 10 a.m. for anyone who wants to come to that. The meeting on Monday had a presentation by Dr. Pamela McElwee, who is part of what's called the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And they put out a thing called the IPDES Nexus Assessment Report 2024. I recommend that you become acquainted with that. But what they're talking about is how all these things connect together, because we tackle these problems frequently in a narrow path. Everybody's dealing with their own particular issues. But what's our long-term strategy for the state? What's the economy going to be? Are we going to change? It used to be DuPont. What is it now? Are we really going to be able to depend on tourism with all these risks? And the state has projected 5+ feet sea level rise by the end of century. Well, I'm in Lewis, so we're around on the bay, but that's going to hit us just as much as anyone else. And if you go to any one of these beaches and you stand there and you say, 5 feet, where is my nose? Make it personal. What is our long-term strategy?
And I'll just make a plug, too, for the Climate Action Plan. The Climate Action Plan, first published in 2021, to be updated in 2025, does look at all of these things together. How do we pull these levers? How do we pull certain levers together to get to the outcomes that we want? How do we incorporate adaptation? How do we gain co-benefits? There's lots of co-benefits. There are good things that happen when you do one thing, basically. And so when we drive electric vehicles, a co-benefit is improved air quality for neighborhoods that are adjacent to highly traveled transportation corridors. And so we're looking at those as well. But it's gnarly, and it is a problem. The Climate Solutions Act of 2023, which is now state law, directs all state agencies to incorporate the Climate Action Plan into their activities. And it's part of my job to go heckle people and say, hey, what are you doing? Are you looking at future impacts in what you're doing, right? And there are some agencies that have been holding hands with DNREC in this for over a decade, and they are getting it, and we're working together. There are some agencies who've had a lot of staff turnover. That's also a concern, and we're working with them. There is a new group, the state climate officers. There's a designee from each state agency who is working with my team, and they're going to have a hand in the 2025 action plan, and they're going to be developing strategies for their agencies and making sure that their staff understand the future implications of climate change. So that is a really great step forward for us. And it's all about partnerships, right? It's about having conversations and talking to people. Hey, are you thinking about this? DelDOT designs bridges for an 80-year lifespan. And they do look at future climate conditions. They know it's really important, and so we've been working with them for a decade and a half to look at the sea level rise projections when they're building a bridge. They can make it wider, make it bigger, or do something else. Taller, right? So yes, thank you for pointing that out. But I do encourage everybody to check out the Climate Action Plan, because there's a lot of good stuff in there, and we have a lot of great work to do in the future.
Gotcha. Sweet. All right, we're going to take one more question, and then...
Hi, my name is Crystal Stokowski, and I'm a DEI and sustainable consultant based in Dewey Beach. I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room, and I would love to know all three of your thoughts. So with the Charles Cullen Bridge and the breaching in March of 2024, and then again in August of 2024, what was the preparation and the plan between that time, and why it breached a second time over the dune? And then with the replenishment project this past winter, and seeing the conditions right now, what are your thoughts on how much sand has already been lost, and what are your plans of action besides the second phase of replenishment to actually keep the sand there and protecting the bridge? Thank you.
Well, I'll touch base on that one a little bit. I know that there is a system that was built into the bridge, and it exists, but it hasn't been operational for 4 to 5 years. The natural sand movement along the shoreline is from south to north. It has not been, in the last 4 to 5 years, it has not been pumped from the south side to the north side. If that system is in place and operates yearly, like it's designed to do and should be doing, I would hope that that solves the problem there. As far as what's been, I mean, I'm not part of the DNREC or any of this, what's been done down there, but you do get certain sand gets pulled out, with the storms and the easterly winds, the northeasterly winds, which we've had some recently, and then they do come back in the summer, to an extent, not complete, but to an extent. I mean, in Bethany, our beaches go out, and then, this time of year they start to build back up again. Not to the point we'd like them to be, but to an extent.
And I'll just add, from Secretary Patterson from DNREC will be here later. I can't speak to the details of that specific project. That's outside of my group, and so I don't want to get myself in trouble and say something wrong. So I think that Secretary Patterson will very likely be addressing the specifics there. But I would like to point out that is a really discrete, episodic problem that's happened as a result of storms and sand loss over time. These are things that are going to happen more frequently in our state in places that you may not have expected them to. And so that's why our hazard mitigation plan, our emergency management plans are so important, and thinking about future conditions as we're building things is very, very important. And so I'll leave the rest of those questions to Secretary Patterson later.
Sweet. Okay, well, first of all, thank you all so much to our panelists today. Give them a round of applause.